because I had a huge amount of shame and guilt, and it was always this kind of like private thing that I never told anyone about. And then as soon as I started talking about it, I felt better. Creativity gave me a purpose again. Gave me a purpose, and it still gives me a purpose to stay. And it's something as simple as just drawing. How much has that changed your life?
Yeah, it is my life. My family and my creativity and friends,
Yeah, it's the same for me.
Yeah, my experience with homelessness was very young. I'm probably very fortunate that I actually don't remember it, but I do think that it's probably part of my DNA. And how it started for me was my mum was at school. She was underage. She had me at school and she didn't have anywhere to live leaving school. So I didn't find out until I was much older, where she was like, I brought you back from the hospital. We didn't really have anywhere to stay. We were surfing the backs of people's cars. That led to a different type of homelessness for me, which was not living with my family, and that's living in children's homes. And that was tough. Living in the children's home, I had a younger brother and I felt responsible for him. And I can remember looking after him a lot. When we would go to bed, I'd make sure he would fall asleep, and then I would go next to the door and I'd be looking to make sure that the person on watch outside was always there. And then I would just sleep, looking to make sure that they're looking after us. Because it's a really unusual position to be in as a child, not knowing any adults where you're living and not knowing if you're safe and not knowing where your next meal's coming from. When you're a child, like I'm probably about 4 years old at this stage, when you're a child, you don't know that it's not normal. You don't know that it's kind of slightly wrong, the position that you've been put in.
That's heavy duty, man.
Yeah.
So young is mind-blowing because it's something that most adults wouldn't be able to deal with, let alone a 4-year-old boy. And that's heavy, man.
And then something really bad happened. What happened was there was a fire in our house, which we started, and the consequence was that my brother died. So I've gone from one moment absolutely looking after my brother to absolute failure, thinking that I killed him. And for a 5-year-old mind, there's not enough capacity for the emotional range to understand what that is.
Just implosion, right?
The closest way is if you have a nightmare at night. When you're in that nightmare, it feels real. I felt for a couple of years that I actually was living within a nightmare. I lived with my grandparents. They couldn't look after me. And then they put me into foster care at 6. And my relationship with my mum's been up and down ever since. But she's probably one of the most important, complicated relationships that I still have to this day.
It's very different, obviously, to what you went through, in the sense that my childhood was great and my family was great. And my parents loved me to bits, but I felt that I didn't fit in anywhere. I went to a boarding school, and in that boarding school I was seen as an outsider because my family didn't come from money. My family's all from the East End. Left school, went to Leeds University, and it was like I'd already dabbled in drugs from there, and then it was throwing myself into kind of rave culture, drug use, and alcohol, and kind of fast forward and leave university. My friends go off and get jobs, I go home, and then I really start to find cocaine and crack cocaine, and then that's it. Again, at the time, I didn't realize that all that was doing was just stripping me, like piece by piece, of like my dignity, my self-respect. All of those core values that we all hold were just going. And that my moral line and moral compass, it just was getting further and further away, and it was just blurring further and further away. And then I start to hear whispering, which I I, at the time, knew nothing about drug-induced psychosis. I didn't understand it. And I'd stand at the bottom of my stairs, and my girlfriend at the time would be in my bed. And I'd think she'd be upstairs with somebody else, so I'd run upstairs. I'd flip her off the mattress and the mattress off the bed. I'd try and put my phone in there and record what was going on. I'd like creep into the room. The window would be open in my bedroom, so I'd climb out the window because I think somebody had just climbed out the window. And but in my head, it's just completely normal. And then there's no money, all the money's dried up, so then it's loans, payday loans, and then it's starting to thieve. So I'm robbing from family, I'm robbing from shops, I'm robbing from everybody, and my family couldn't handle it anymore. And they just decided enough was enough, and they threw me out, and I said I was gonna go and live with my girlfriend, but we'd split. So I just made my way into London, met up with writers who I knew. The kind of daily routine would be, I'd meet them, we'd paint, we'd go to like Hornsey Freight Yard, sit in there for 2-3 hours, go out, start walking back through Tottenham. My friends would disperse and go home. I'd go back to Bruce Grove Station, and I'd just wait. I'd wait for the first train, and then the first train would come. Next stop would be Seven Sisters, and at that time in the morning, all the barriers are open to get down onto the underground, and I'd just sleep on the tube, just go back and forth on the tube until I felt like I'd slept enough. The thing that I found the worst would be walking in the middle of the night, just walking for hours and hours, just not to be cold. And then whilst all this is going on, my mental health is completely on the floor. What makes it like where I'm so lucky is one of the people that stuck by me, which is why it's kind of, I find your story emotional, so emotional, is one of the people, if she wasn't there, I'd be done. It was my mum. And she'd take me to meetings and sit outside meetings in her car, and she'd read a book. And she'd take me every night. And that's how I found recovery. And then I started to try and get better.
Is there a path that you can remember coming out? It sounds like your mum really helped you, but like for you to go to a meeting, you've got to come to some kind of conclusion inside yourself. Was there a turning point? Was there what was the bottom, or what was that switch?
The moment that I decided enough is enough was I went to my sister's wedding in Italy, and I'd been clean for about a year, but relapsing with alcohol. And at the wedding, I met my now partner, Ruth, and she had a 1-year-old son, hadn't had a female companion for years. And I'd given up on love, totally given up on it. And we got together and I fell in love with this person. I knew that if I didn't change everything, I couldn't be a father to this child. So essentially what it boiled down to for me, and what I think sobriety is about a solid human connection to something bigger than yourself. A reason to get up in the morning. And you know why, my work, and then responsibility. We haven't even touched on bringing a creative element to people's lives, really. How much has that changed your life?
Yeah, it is my life. My family and my creativity and friends,
Yeah, it's the same for me.
Yeah.
It's just it's such a huge part of my recovery. Creativity gave me a purpose again. It gave me a purpose, and it still gives me a purpose to today. And it's something as simple as just drawing. And it's everything. It's everything to me.
It's quite deep, the wood, isn't it? Is it more than one piece glued together, or is that
It's like a plywood, handmade plywood panel. And then it's gessoed and sanded between 5 and 6 times, depending on what that finish is going to be. So it's got texture to it. All of my work is based on Einstein's theory of repeating the same action over and over again and expecting a different outcome. That is insanity. So it's the same image over and over again, but creating a different outcome. I wanted to take the idea of mental health, but portray it in my style and how I wanted to portray it, which would be accessible. So the piece is called Holding It All Together, Kinda, and it's the idea of the disintegration of pop culture, but also the disintegration of people's mental health, my mental health, especially back in that situation. And the more I was on the street and the more I was in that situation, the worse that disintegration got. Yeah.
Very cool. What I'm exploring is, are we alone? So when I think of like homelessness, you're in this overly populated, very dense place of people, and yet you can feel like you're by yourself or alone.
Yeah.
And I think that-ness can also be in a family, in a school, in a club, in just an environment where there's lots of other people, but you feel like you're alone. We aren't really alone, but the mind has this trick. Hearing your process with the Einstein quote, it took me many years to discover that what I was doing was I was taking things that people discarded and threw away, they're recycling, and I wanted to make it, in my mind, something beautiful so that they would want it back, which really reflected my early childhood.
100%. Every individual has their own story. It's not just this blanket thing. And we love now to just blanket cover, label everything. That person's homeless, that person's an addict, that person's whatever. Not every drug addict's gonna rob you, you know?
No.
Not every homeless person is dangerous. There's the people that need help. And if we can change that idea, and also the shame and guilt that people feel that are in that situation, trying to strip that back in some way. Because I had a huge amount of shame and guilt, and it was always this kind of like private thing that I never told anyone about. And then as soon as I started talking about it, I felt better.
I was in that really, really, really tough place, and I've made it here. If one person hears a story and it inspires them and it helps them just a little bit through our art, and it inspires other people that are in a really tough situation pre-homelessness or the other side, I thought, yeah, like, let's get involved.
Totally.
Let's do something special.
That's what it's all about at the end of the day, right?